Hello, my name is Hannah Galnick. I'm going to be giving a presentation on America's Great Depression by Murray Rothbard. Murray Rothbard is an Austrian economist and historian. He was influenced by other economists such as Mises and Hayek and wrote many pieces that contributed to right libertarianism. To begin the presentation, I want to give a brief overview of how Rothbard described the Great Depression. The Great Depression began in 1929 and lasted a total of 11 years. The Depression had a detrimental impact on mostly all who lived through it. During the Great Depression, there was a significant rate of unemployment. In fact, it was the highest rate the United States had ever seen in its history. The rate of unemployment increased to over 26% and lasted at around 15% until World War II. Living conditions were harsh and even deathly as malnutrition became a growing issue, and bankruptcies increased all over the nation. The stock market had completely crashed. In the 1920s, America experienced a lot of prosperity. There was a lot of investment in capital and savings. However, at the same time, there was a credit expansion. The result was, and I quote, malinvested capital, leading finally and inevitably to economic crisis. The quote above is from Mises, who Rothbard was influenced by. Mises states credit expansion can bring about a temporary boom, but such a fictitious prosperity must end in a general depression of trade, a slump. Inflation increased by 63% in the 1920s. The expansion was in monetary credit and bank deposits. Proper policy would have restricted banks and increased monetary restrictions to slow credit expansion. However, excess reserves may not have even been in place in this time. The greatest factor behind the inflation in the 1920s was the increase in bank reserves. Bank reserves increased by 47.5%. However, the money would be lended out to other individuals, which only had a drastic multiplier effect on the money supply. The graph being displayed shows the tremendous increase in the money supply during the 1920s. 10 factors are responsible for the inflationary boom. I will cover a couple. First, the monetary gold stock is the first factor I will discuss. If the gold stock increases, so do monetary reserves. The second factor is Federal Reserve asset purchases. The Federal Reserve is in complete control of this factor and increase the reserves by buying, for example, United States government securities. The third factor is bills discounted by the Federal Reserve. These bills are loans that are made out to member banks. Other factors include Federal Reserve credit, Treasury cash holdings, and money in circulation outside of the banks. The general question then is, what caused the Great Depression? Many blamed laissez-faire or hands-off economics, saying that the government was not active enough. Capitalism was highly scrutinized and labeled as unstable. The government was sought at to fix and stabilize the economy. However, the government is not all that innocent, as demonstrated in the cartoon. According to Rothbard, the interference of the government only prolongs the depressions. I quote, "The more the government intervenes to delay the market's adjustments, the longer and more grueling the depression will be, and the more difficult will be the road to complete recovery. The government hurts recovery by preventing the adjustment of prices with inflation, by keeping wages high, resulting in longer unemployment, by keeping prices high, by subsidizing unemployment, and by encouraging meaningless consumption but not savings. Rothbard stated, "More savings and less consumption would speed recovery." Rothbard stated what does cause the Great Depression. However, he also wanted to make it clear what does not cause depressions. Therefore, he decided to combat some myths in his novel. The first was that overproduction leads to depression. I quote, "As long as any economic desires remain unsatisfied, so long will production be needed and demanded." Rothbard states how overproduction is not a cause for depressions. Money will still exist and conditions can adjust to make sure that there is still sales of goods. Next, he debunks the myth of underconsumption. Rothbard argues how no matter the level of depression, some minimal level of consumption will always exist. Prices will adapt to the required levels. Crises are caused by malinvestment and undersavings, as stated earlier. He continues on to the acceleration principle. The acceleration principle states how all production is for eventual consumption and how demand for goods depends on consumption. Rothbard rejects this theory since he does not believe that consumption is the driving force of an economy. Lastly, the myth of the business cycle theory. He does not agree with this theory because a cycle takes place over an entire economy, not in 3 different cycles. Rothbard also throws in how too many investment opportunities and over-optimism or over-pessimism is not the cause of depressions either. Rothbard continues on to discuss President Herbert Hoover. He explains how Hoover was not laissez-faire and was actually causing interference that only heightened the Depression. Hoover advocated high wage rates, public works, and the path to the New Deal. Hoover released the New Deal Farm Program. He advocated $950 million to public works, including projects such as the Hoover Dam. Overall, Rothbard concludes how government intervention is the main cause of not only the Great Depression, but for aggravating others as well. I quote from Rothbard, "If government wishes to alleviate rather than aggravate a depression, its only valid course is laissez-faire, to leave the economy alone. The best way to cure the depression is to decrease the budget and leave the economy to properly adjust on its own." Rothbard advocates his principles of Austrian economics throughout his novel. He concludes, "The guilt for the Great Depression must at long last be lifted from the shoulders of the free market economy and placed where it properly belongs, at the doors of politicians and bureaucrats." Thank you for watching.